to Mission Command. The hopper had landed in the busy hopper bay. 5 hoppers were waiting to go out and 3 had just landed. The mechanics were running about doing last-minute checks and pilots and crew were milling about waiting for the green light to board and go. Kel waited for the green light in the hopper to let him know he had clearance to disembark. He unbuckled his safety belt and grabbed the briefcase from the locker. When the ramp was fully down, he strode down it. It closed behind him. He didn't recognize anyone in the hopper bay. They clearly wore Mission Command insignia, but many seemed to be from other bases. He'd seen that more and more lately as Mission Command was gaining a bit of a foothold and developing other bases elsewhere. The bay was huge. It was most of the central part of the Starfish, the living quarters and other buildings being around the outside in the tendrils, which spread out like a web. Each of the tendrils ended in a thruster bay, so that if need be the whole base could take off. Around the central hub there was a great deal of security, which evaluated the off-planet teams when they returned. He crossed the bay, avoiding eye contact as he certainly wasn't in the mood for any sort of a conversation, and went straight to the corridor which led to the quarantine zone. The corridor was white, smooth-floored, and lined with cameras. He knew he was being watched. It was all part of the security. Then came the actual bulletproof glass quarantine boxes. A box opened for him, and he stepped inside after putting the case in a separate box to his left. That would have its own scans for explosives and other possible traps. This was always a nerve-wracking part of returning, as if he'd picked up something off ship that they couldn't deal with. He was aware of the flamethrowers also installed. He had seen them activated once, in the early days. A contaminated soldier had come back and had started his transformation into a carapace warrior. He walked in, Ash was carried out, but the problem was solved. Medical and other scanners sprang to life when they sensed movement. A red beam of light ran over his body, head to foot. That was the initial security scan which nobody had the right to object to. He stood stock still, as he had so many other times on returning from a mission. He knew he then had to endure the legal preamble which would come next, but it was a necessary evil. The intercom crackled and sprang into life. You are being scanned by the Insulink medical scanner. Reference number SC2341566. Please stand completely still. This will not hurt nor compromise you in any way. The procedure does not infringe your rights as an individual, but it is an essential requirement for entering the base. Should you wish not to be scanned, please return to your vessel and await further instructions. Non-response in 5 seconds indicates your compliance. Kel stood still and waited. Thank you. You have been scanned and you are completely healthy. There is a slight strain to your right ankle, and this has been logged on your medical record. Please attend a medical officer to have this attended to at your convenience. Welcome back to base KE-237 Kel Ellen. The red light on the control panel switched to green and the door in front of him slid silently open. He decided not to go straight to the med bay. His ankle wasn't hurting him that much, and he couldn't remember when he had hurt it. He picked up the briefcase and stepped out onto the polished blue floor on the other side of the compartment with a sigh of relief. His eyes ran along the photographs of planets, which was an attempt at making it all seem a bit more homely. Although Kel had done this walk 100 or so times since he had moved to the base, he always managed to notice something new. They didn't change the photos. His planet was one of them, but somehow there was always something in one of the pictures that he hadn't seen before. He breathed in lemon disinfectant and the distinct smell of the corridor. The smell of coming home. He took a moment to think, a ritual he always did. He then strolled off down the corridor. The glass door at the end swished open in front of him and closed behind him as he stepped through. As he looked back, large metal clamps reached down to encircle the hopper's belly before they lifted it up and took it off to maintenance for its post-flight checks. It would then be off out again. At the second glass door he came to, which opened in front of him, he stepped into the pristine white corridor. He was now in the main hub of the station. The wide corridor which circled the hopper bay and connected all the corridors which reached out from the middle. The door closed behind him, and he was clear of the security protocols and systems. There were no photographs or pictures here, just white walls. He walked down the corridor, ignoring the doors on either side and corridors which led to the different portions of the base, and then he met up with Shantara and Roland, who had just come through the pilot's arrival lounge. Both wore military-issue boiler suits with their rank and insignia of their planet of origin. Shantara the insignia of a pilot, Roland that of engineer, and the insignia of mission command. Something which was missing on Shantara's suit, as she was just a rookie and not accepted as a full member yet. Shantara smiled broadly at Kel. Roland kept his distance and fell slightly behind as they headed off. She fell in step beside Kel, and they strode on in an awkward silence down the corridor until they came to double doors on the right. Shantara tapped in her code with her elegantly painted fingernails, 4568, and the chrome doors swished effortlessly open. She looked slightly nervous as she realized that she had used the wrong code, the code she had got from Roland, which gave her access all areas. Kel hesitated. That's cheeky. How did you get that? That isn't the rookie's code. Shantara smiled. Well, soon I'll get it anyway. I forgot the code, so someone let me in. Kel grinned. Funny how the code you shouldn't have has stuck in your mind more. Shantara smiled back. Yes, typical. She then laughed. Slightly damp air from the steamy shower area billowed into the corridor, carrying the aroma of perfume and bath products. The room they entered was bustling with members of Mission Command. Rows of shiny black lockers lined the walls. Some open, their owners getting things out or putting them back. Most were locked shut. There were 20 soldiers and civilians who were gearing up, dressing down or fetching things from their lockers before changing in the cubicles to the right of the room. Kel went to his locker and ran his hand over the identification pad. The locker door swung open. Where other lockers were adorned with personal items and decorated with photographs and mementos of previous happy times, Kel's was bare, practical, and impersonal. Shantara leant forward and whispered, If you give the case to me, then you won't have to do all that paperwork. This is your idea and a good one. He hesitated for a moment, thinking, turned, and then handed the briefcase to Shantara with an impish grin. He knew that she would take it, and in doing so she had taken on the responsibility of logging the case and its contents in, something he detested doing. By the rules, he should have given it to Roland, as he was a fully fledged member. As he had expected, she was glad of the physical contact and was looking more at him than thinking about what she was doing and its implications. Her hand brushed his as she took the briefcase from him. That sent him feelings he really wanted to bury. He was confused and tired. He just wanted to get back to his room and sleep. Kel took out his towel, buckskin tunic, and leather trousers and disappeared without a word through the door to the shower room, leaving her standing with Roland. Shantara and Roland went to their lockers and took out their mission logs in silence. Roland kept looking as if he was going to speak, but as Shantara appeared busy and glared when he caught her eye, he shut his mouth again. He was bemused as to why Kel had given her the case, which was so valuable. They left in silence and re-entered the corridor. A little further on they stopped outside, one of the doors on the right, and again Shantara entered her code before Roland could get there to enter his. She always did. It was with a gleeful look that she possessed the code in the first place. It had been their little secret. The door slid silently open. Roland did look a little upset. You having the code was supposed to be our secret. I only gave it to you as you had forgotten the rookie one and I didn't know it. Shantara looked upset. I'm sorry, I didn't think it would upset you. Don't worry, I won't tell anyone else. She reached over and gave him a kiss on the cheek. His thoughts were scrambled, and he somehow didn't think it was so important anymore. The large room beyond was laid out in two halves. The closest half was painted gunmetal gray, was the working booth area where mission operatives came to write up their missions. Pictures of different types of hoppers and larger ships hung on the wall. The light gray floor was a contrast to the white of the floor outside. 3 long lines of individual cubicles were set out along tables in parallel lines. The idling screens displaying the standard mission command screensaver. Some cubicles were occupied, most were empty. The far side of the room had been partitioned off across the middle of the room by a glass wall, and the single glass door was shut. This was the briefing room and on occasion meeting room. It was a slightly smaller room, and its main feature was a large black table with chairs around it. The room was currently empty and set with notepads, bottles of water and glasses waiting for the next meeting. They walked in silence to a pair of terminals next to each other, sat down and logged in their passwords. The logo screensaver shrunk to a tiny spot and the working screen appeared, offering a list of choices. They both clicked on Mission Report. The report template appeared, already filled in with their mission brief, and as they began typing, the boxes filled up, and the auto-correct kept their reports roughly readable. Shantara stopped typing and hesitated. Why doesn't Kel have to file a report? Roland smiled. Kel can't read or write, and you took the case off of him, which in turn meant you took on the responsibility for the report about it and logging it in. The commander got him a teacher, but she gave up in the end. He'll do a verbal recorded debrief later, if there is anything worth reporting. He's not one for noticing detail anyway, and his reports are very uninformative, so I have been led to believe. They sat in silence and typed. Shantara was now scowling, and they hit send when they had finished. That was for Roland's benefit. He gave her a sympathetic look. Then she turned away as she couldn't contain her grin any longer. Shantara had the case open on her lap, as she was supposed to be doing an inventory of what was inside. She had it on her lap with the lid up facing Roland, so all Roland could see was the back of the case. She looked up over it and caught Roland's attention. "Isn't it about time that you told me a bit more about the followers? Surely it is not confidential information. You are keen enough on your stories. Why not that one? We've got a little time while we wait for our next orders to come through." Roland rushed to finish off his report so that he could talk to Shantara. He didn't notice that she was doing something inside the open suitcase rather than just listing what was there. She had taken the information stick out of the console in the suitcase and had inserted it into the small tablet, which was also in the case. As Roland turned to look at her, she had set the system to delete, which would wipe the whole system and remove all information from the information stick and the tablet. It had started the system wiping process, which would take a few minutes to complete. Roland looked a little stunned. It is well documented on all the information networks. You can read up on them anytime. You mean you want me to tell you something, a story? That makes it change. You usually don't seem to want to hear anything I have to say. Okay, well, I will then, but I can't think that I know anything that you don't. As you probably know, the followers came to the galaxies about 25 years ago. There was no record of them before then, and most people welcomed them initially as a curiosity as they seemed harmless. They came with a new and exciting ideal based on peace and cooperation. They seemed to have good ethics in general, which most people weren't that bothered about, but they made people's lives better. They took a role in commerce, created jobs, and integrated themselves into general life, made their homes on different planets, and started multiplying. People liked what they were doing as they took on the jobs most people didn't want to do and offered jobs to those who wanted them. They didn't notice the way they moved into all walks of life to start with, but later focused on getting control of various organizations through natural promotion. Looking back on it, they took what was seen as a healthy interest in the galaxies and spread by having many children, marrying into indigenous populations, and then having many children with them. They stood for positions in local government and then general governments, and got themselves into positions of real influence on an intergalactic scale. In a few generations, they had control at all levels, and many local races were no longer purebred. They were part follower. Their breeding cycle and development to adulthood being far shorter than most of the other races meant that in about 15 to 20 years, they were on to their third generation. While they were the saviors of the galaxies, that wasn't a problem, but a few years ago things changed. Many people couldn't see it, but those who did started to realize that perhaps these people were not the salvation they had made themselves out to be. By then, of course, it was too late. They were the lawmakers, the generals, and the ministers. These people who tried to speak the truth were seen as troublemakers and anarchists. Many were publicly put to death. Most were privately executed. This was when Mission Command came out of the shadows to be there for those who had realized the problem and to educate those who had not yet realized the jeopardy. I think the rest is pretty much history. Some planets had lived in peace for thousands of years without major technological advancement, progressing at their own natural pace. Suddenly, they had technology thrust upon them, which in the most part wasn't a huge problem, while everything was peaceful. When the followers started having opposition from those on planets who realized they were being totally controlled, they chose those planets to harvest for the resources they needed. They also took what they wanted from planets where they would not be noticed. They kept the conflict very quiet, reporting that this was to do with natural disasters. This did not go well for the planets they harvested, as they left them with an ecological wasteland as they stripped assets and even soil in some places. They left them as dust bowls with the inhabitants left to scratch an existence in what was left. If they looked like the information was going to get out, these people were wiped out by natural disasters, and the harvesting was hidden as part of the crisis. Wherever the followers landed, they converted new followers, and those who would not convert were left as burnt corpses, as they were proclaimed as witches and burned at the stake. They seem to fear a type of mystic, although we are not altogether sure what that is all about. It was join up or die, and where everyone stood against them, nobody would survive to report on the situation. Once they had an uninhabited planet, as they had killed the indigenous population, they would move their own people in. They would blame natural disasters, so even though people knew about it, they could not see what is really happening. There was a major broadcast a while back which terrified the inhabitants of some planets into believing that if they stood up to the followers, they would die. So even that positive propaganda, which should have galvanized the populations, backfired, as it gave the followers even more power. Rather than weakening them, it strengthened their position and effectively neutralized the possible opposition before it set out. Some say they put that propaganda around themselves. In some places where the inhabitants joined them of their own free will, they are still heralded as heroes who saved the worlds. Those people live under their complete thrall and control. Where they weren't so welcome, they destroyed villages in the latter years as a lesson to those who would stand against them, and as their numbers grew, and as they acquired better technology, whole cities, and even planets which opposed them were wiped out. Their control of the media meant they were able to explain everything away again as natural disasters. That was the power of their propaganda. Then they could impose their rules and regimes to protect the people from similar disaster. People lost their will to fight for free will, as on the face of it they had great lives and everything they needed if they did what they were told. The first thing they got rid of were the meeting places, so that anyone who did have rebellious ideas couldn't spread them verbally. They had to use electronic communication, and that of course was monitored, so they could be eliminated or disgraced, which often led to execution. Taverns on some worlds are banned. Others have just gone out of business, as the people were discouraged from frequenting them by cheap prices elsewhere in the large shops, which could buy and sell cheap and all too available entertainment, which kept them in their houses and distracted. It is only on planets like Whitewater, and the ones they aren't too worried about as they are outside the main galaxies, that such places still exist. Where free spirits had met up in pubs and taverns to discuss their ideas, these became a thing of the past. The followers then banned alcohol where they could, and their strict religious doctrine forbade their believers to touch it. From our point of view, and with a bit of knowledge, you can see what they did. We believe that they are using a drug as well, and drinking alcohol seems to lessen the effect on the mind. We aren't sure yet how it works or how they get this drug into the system, and it doesn't work forever, but there is something in it, we are sure. The only places left to meet now are the followers' meeting houses, where obviously it is not possible to say a word out of turn, and everything is recorded and is admissible in the countless trials for crimes against the state. This in turn destroyed various small economies, as many businesses had supplied the now non-existent meeting places. They went out of business almost overnight. In truth, it drove drinking underground. People chose to drink in their own homes, where they felt they were safe, and this meant that they drank more, and without the social interaction that the places had brought, there was a greater incidence of depression. Of course, this led these people to be discovered by the authorities and removed. Alternatively, it led people to reach for something in their lives. The first option when they were caught, and the followers were more than happy to oblige. It was a win-win situation. Where they encountered a non-technological planet, they harvested it for its natural resources and left it a wasteland. Planets like Kel's ended up that way. As most of these were underdeveloped for a reason, be it harsh climate or their location, they were unsuitable for colonization, harvested and abandoned. Manipulating internal struggle for their own political advancement and using bureaucracy to slow everything down allowed them the opportunity to gain a foothold politically. That, and having their own people in positions of power. Subterfuge and some incredibly ingenious minds allowed them to infiltrate all levels of government eventually on those planets with complex political structure and change the laws before there was any chance to rally ordnance and gather troops to object. In all, it was a swift, precise, and well thought out, excellently executed takeover that left governments either in tatters or completely controlled, and enough planets under their control after the initial invasion that they were able to easily quell any further organized resistance. They also managed to manipulate other forms of technology, which they managed to eliminate through viruses. Shintara was watching the system wipe, which was nearly at 100%. She looked confused. You sound as if you admire them. Also, I think you had better explain that last bit. You lost me there. Roland smiled, glad that someone was interested in what he had to say. Perhaps a bad way of putting it. Basically, we used to be able to use teleport devices a lot. Matter was broken down into its basic particles or strings, and then reformed at the new location. This was an ideal and very environmentally friendly way of traveling. Apart from the huge amount of energy required to break something or someone down and reform it, of course. Anyway, before we realized that they had been tampering with it, most of the major players who could have confronted them had been eliminated by certain freak accidents, which left them scrambled and therefore dead when they reformed. That had a dual benefit for the followers. Firstly, it eliminated people who were a threat without the followers having to get the blame, and secondly, it meant that teleport transport was deemed far too dangerous to use. It slowed travel down and kept people isolated and under surveillance, as their only way of communicating was via voice call or messages, which again were intercepted and recorded. They had every form of communication bugged very early on. Teleport technology was of course scrapped, and those who had created it or worked on it were put out of work. It is safe to say that anyone who was research and development also disappeared shortly afterwards. But, and this is not generally known, the followers could keep on using the technology, which gave them a huge advantage. They have tried to cover their actual origins up as well. What you know, and probably what most people know, is that they apparently started as an environmentally friendly group. They brought about sweeping changes that were for the better for some planets, which were nearing extinction through overuse. They also managed to manipulate it that farmland became planted with unproductive trees. This was of course welcomed, and there was no thought to the long-term ability of that planet to support itself. The planets were left totally reliant on follower-owned distribution companies, which carried food from their wholly owned planets. They were known as Fallow Earth at that point. They took on the nickname Followers due to their preaching that it was better to leave planets and areas to recover, to be fallow for a while to let nature take over again to replenish its resources. There were few who knew enough or dared to speak up against them. But I remember reading the writings of Erasmus Deck many years ago. He was an idealist and a visionary and allegedly the founder. He basically put into words what the rest of us were thinking. He was outspoken and many people believed he wouldn't last the year, but somehow he did. He seemed to be one step ahead of the followers at every step, and rumor has it that he was something to do with the startup and concealing of Mission Command until it was time for them, or rather us to step up to help in the good fight. His writings about a utopian civilization where everyone could live in harmony with nature formed the basis of what is now the followers' philosophy. They used his original doctrine and corrupted it, implementing their own version by force. I don't know what happened to him. He seemed to just disappear. No record or mention of it anywhere. One day he was here, the next he vanished. If you want my opinion, he is now in a follower research establishment somewhere. Way back, they also started removing some cities that were decaying after relocating their loyal inhabitants. Of course, there is no word about what happened to the non-loyal ones. The cities were obliterated and trees planted in their place. Wildlife was reintroduced, particularly wolves, bears, and the more dangerous species, rendering those areas uninhabitable, which had the dual use of making sure that they could not be safe areas for anyone who opposed the followers, all under the guise of regreening worlds. People loved it. They couldn't get enough of the followers making things more green and pleasant. In elections, their candidates walked into positions of power, and once there they changed the laws so that eventually there was no more democracy. The followers had power for life. Then it all changed. They played on the mistrust that they could easily create. Followers looked no different to anyone else, and it was widely believed that they were just people who had come to follow the follower ideal. They wear no insignia or use identifying equipment. Anyone could be a follower, and it was well known that they had sleepers everywhere who didn't know that they were a follower until they were activated. So, who could be trusted if you didn't agree with the follower doctrines and laws? It was mostly the conspiracy theorists who worried the most. The public was pretty much oblivious, or pretended to be for an easy life. They may have said that they weren't worried about the followers being everywhere, but that was the choice, and in general they were happy with their lives and didn't want to rock the boat. Not everyone wants to be an individual or even think too much for themselves. Their controlled lives were very comfortable, and it is hard to rebel against that. It was hard to question the followers as well. What could anyone really say? They gave everyone a better standard of living. No, I correct myself there. They gave those who followed the followers a better life, and those were generally those of use to the followers. Only now that we think that they are progressing into genetic manipulation of the population do we know without doubt that we have a distinct enemy. This is something that those who have found out find distasteful. But too late. If you disagree now, you die. Their bone soldiers are easy to recognize. I'm sure you have seen them. Shantara shook her head. Okay, well, their exoskeleton makes them look like they are wearing a skeleton mask. Few have been caught by the rebellion, and when they have, well, they have a self-destruct build in which has eliminated those who caught them. That also leaves very little to analyze. As to what they look like under the mask, which I am sure you want to know, or if it is a mask at all and not part of them, well, that is unknown. What is known is that their great strength and speed makes them a formidable enemy. They are totally loyal to the followers and unstoppable other than destroying them when they are carrying out a command. We have lost a lot of good people to them. Mission Command managed to survive, and that is only because it has been very well hidden. The genius minds that have been gathered here have managed to keep it that way, and somehow we managed to keep one step ahead of planet destruction and other possible collateral damage situations. Odd really that this organization was created for just such an occurrence as the followers, initiated by a lone scientist many hundreds of years ago, way before the followers. How he knew I cannot hazard a guess. He had been heralded as a nutcase by his peers, but thankfully he had been a very rich nutcase with a very clear idea of what he wanted to create. He had set up the foundation, and they had then set up command bases around the galaxies to protect against the event of an incursion, such as that of the followers. Each base has a different design and is hidden in a different way. That is common knowledge, so it doesn't matter if I tell you. There is no communication between them that I know of, and each is unknown to the others until they are needed. Even then things changed. I remember the day we heard well. It had not been long ago that I and Lex, a Sharathian warrior, the lizard folk, had been sitting in the debriefing room after a mission. Shantara looked blankly at him. The system wipe was complete, and she had taken the stick out of the tablet and returned it to the case. No, I'm not going off topic here. We had been seated in the debriefing room for a meeting with Commander Zack. Just like any other day, really after a mission. That was the day he called in everyone else and informed us that things had changed. The followers had started demanding conversion to their faith. They had spread their beliefs since they arrived, but now they demanded that all who believed in them had to have an implant, which we also believe releases a drug which removes any free will. Those who were taken from then on were taken to their research facilities and put in pods. The implant was injected, and they spent time being indoctrinated with the followers' true belief system. That way they could guarantee loyal followers, and it also made it impossible for there to be a spy in their ranks. The implant was not only detectable by them, it was coded to the person it had been implanted in. They could then track anyone at any time. Well, that is how I heard it back then. How Mission Command found out about it, I truly do not know. The implant was relatively small, but the chemical that was also introduced has proven almost impossible to analyze, as we have never managed to get hold of it in a large enough quantity to isolate its properties. The only positive news which comes from this is that if we could develop the technology, then we could turn this on them and be able to use that technology to detect who are followers, which in turn stops us getting infiltrated. Of course, all this does not apply to the originals, those who came to be followers because they actually believed or were born as followers. They didn't need the implant or the drug. It is hoped that on one of our missions we will find some intelligence that will give us a way to counteract the drug. Until today, we had to work with what we had. That is why today's mission was so important. That mercenary was a follower. What he carried was a report, but obviously we don't know what was in it and what it was about other than it was important. So you had better go and get that delivered to Commander Zack. He pointed to her orders, which were flashing on the screen, to report to the base commander. Shantara looked down at the briefcase that Kel had given to her to look after. I suppose I had better. She got up and left the room. 3 kidnapped. Commander Zack was in his office, sitting at